Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be talking about Dickens in the newly unified Italy, focusing on his critical reception and the first translations of his works. The years of the life and works of Charles Dickens are also those of the battles, military and ideological, of the Risorgimento. This crucial moment in Italian history inevitably influenced the first reception of Dickens's works in several ways, in that the primary goal of Italian publishers and translators, especially in the most dynamic urban centers, was to educate the readership and make them Italians, deploying the new media of the novel. The year of Dickens's death, 1870, marked the completion of Italian unification with the capture of Rome. In the following years, Dickens's novels acquired a mythical aura, offering a radical alternative to French naturalism in what came to be described as a battle of representation. What was the best way to shape the cultural identity of the new nation? Zola or Dickens? Reception of Dickens was also conditioned by the curious paradox of Italian Anglophilia, that while it originated in opposition to France, nevertheless, English writing was usually assimilated through a French filter, in that Italian translators based their versions of English novels on French translations of the bel et infidel kind, which hardly respected the original and often had agendas of their own. The first translations, published at the moment when French literary culture was dominant in Italy, established Dickens's fame as a moralist and sentimental author, in contrast to the ecstasies of Zola's dour experimentalism, which many intellectuals regarded as morally harmful and morbid. However, Silvio Spaventa Filippi, one of Dickens's first Italian translators, argued that his works had been misunderstood in Italy, particularly the Pickwick Papers. What mattered to Filippi and other intellectuals writing after the First War was the author's humour, which they felt had been largely missed in the post-unification period. The intense focus on Dickens's moral values at the expense of his brilliant humour, which was lost in translation or simply misunderstood, might explain why, with the exception perhaps of the Christmas stories, his work was admired rather than appreciated, at least by the Italian critics, until as late as the 1970s. Dickens's rich language and polyphonic style never really got through in the first Italian translation. But let's consider how the values conveyed by Dickens's novels were seen in the Italian political context after unification. As many critics have observed, the stories he tells revolve around an idea of belonging, where characters are invariably presented as citizens and participants in an urban and national community. During his lifetime, Dickens constantly sought to create a large community of readers, with himself as author or editor at its center, and once a member like the others and a promoter of their inclusion. His prose is permeated by what systemic psychologists refer to as the semantic of belonging. A polarity develops around notions of inclusion and exclusion. Some characters form a family, a social group, or a community, while others, orphans, prostitutes, thieves, and so on, are woefully excluded. Dickens speaks both of his characters and his readers as a family, which he entertains with household words. The Risorgimento intellectual elite shared Dickens's aspiration for an inclusive community. Despite the achievement of political unity, Italy was still deeply divided in all kinds of ways, culturally and linguistically. Like the children's books of Edmondo De Amicis and Carlo Collodi, the author of Pinocchio, the first translations of Dickens's novels are driven by an agenda of cultural education, the diffusion of literacy and social morality among new Italians. Dickens could boast many influential supporters among his Italian contemporaries. As early as 1849, the young patriot Goffredo Mameli who wrote Italy's national anthem, asked for Dickens to be read to him on his deathbed. Ugo Eugenio Tarchetti, a major literary figure, translated our mutual friend while writing his own masterpiece, Fosca. Salvatore Farina, known as the Italian Dickens, and celebrated novelist Antonio Fogazzaro were both assiduous Dickens readers. Fogazzaro, in particular, drew a contrast between English humour and the French wit, preferring the first for its warm affection and fragrant feeling, all too rare in our country. Dismissing the superficial sparkle of French feuilleton, Fogazzaro praises the kind of novel written by Dickens or Thackeray, which is knowingly a family book, speaks a simple and Puritan language, almost always tells the stories of working-class neighbours, cares about household management, is moved to pity, shows intimate feelings, and has a clear conscience that allows it to sleep sound by the fireplace, he writes. Fogazzaro then compares the passion and intelligence of the English humorists with the poor Italian writing of the time, prescribing the kind of language Italian novelists ought to use in their books. The novelist of taste, he explains, mustn't make the mistake of giving his characters, whatever their provincial backgrounds, a fully Tuscan idiom. But nor must he imitate those like Walter Scott and Dickens, who had them speak the true dialect of the provinces. The first method goes against the truth, the second against art. Conditioned as it was by these political and cultural imperatives, the circulation of Dickens's novels was already considerable during the author's lifetime. Several magazines featured serial publications and partial translations, while most Milanese publishers were aiming to offer versions of all his books as early as the 1840s. The discrepancy between his popularity among readers on the one hand and the lack of critical appreciation on the other was reflected in two antithetical translational trends. Ambitious, highbrow translations, for example, of Bosse's Sketches and Oliver Twist, were promoted by Italian intellectuals to offer a kind of prose no Italian writers were practicing. At the same time, particularly after unification, the majority of translations offered easy, domesticated versions of the Christmas stories for less sophisticated readers. For both approaches, the determination to offer an alternative to the immoral French naturalists was a constant. In this regard, the first translation of Little Dorrit, serialized in 1873 and 1874 in the right-wing Neapolitan newspaper L'Unità Nazionale, is instructive. The celebrated intellectual Ruggero Bonghi, the paper's editor, had published a book entitled Why Italian Literature is Not Popular in Italy, and was actually appointed Italian Minister of Education in 1874. Through his newspaper, Bonghi was seeking to present a British social and political model to Italian readers. Benjamin Disraeli's Endymion, for example, was reviewed as a fine representation of a society where politics played a positive role. Bonghi also admired William Gladstone's writing, comparing him to Alessandro Manzoni, for his moral authority. In general, Bonghi was attracted to a notion of British freedoms that he contrasted with the darker vision of social revolution offered by the French literary avant-garde. Other intellectuals in Naples shared his views, seeing in the English novel an example of socially committed writing that emphasized domesticity and the life of the city, symbol of industrial urbanization. In her essay, The Poor of Naples, for example, journalist Jessie White Mario, wife of a Garibaldino and fervent activist, cites Dickens as an example of a writer who speaks out against social squalor. This emphasis on the didactic side of Dickens's work overshadowed its humor, which, as his friend Foster pointed out, allowed Dickens to transcend class differences and discover the affinities between the high and the low, the attractive and the repulsive, the rarest things and things of every day, which bring us all upon the level of a common humanity. In short, humour is a crucial component in the creation of a communitarian link between author and reader, and among readers. To lose it is to lose an essential ingredient. The problem for translators was that, as the Russian critic Bakhtin remarked, much of the comedy of Dickens depended on heteroglossia, the juxtaposition of distinct varieties of speech within a single language. In the English novel, he observed, especially in the English comic novel, we find a parodic reprocessing of almost all levels of literary language, both conversational and written, that were current at the time. Now, how could this many discursive levels be reproduced in a new national Italian language that was to be modeled on flexibly pure Florentine Tuscan? More generally, how can a translation create a sense of belonging to a community quite different from the one the source text is evoking? In the years of the Risorgimento, with the striving towards linguistic unification, it was unthinkable, for Gazzaro noted, to use dialects in translation. Indeed, part of the agenda behind translating novels was that of promoting the standardization of a national language, and through that language, the sense of belonging to a state that was still extremely fragile. The strict use of Florentine Tuscan was bound to flatten the polyphony of Dickens's novels, depriving them of their wonderful humour, which again was crucial in the construction of a shared belonging. This was the dilemma the first translator of Little Dorrit, Federico Verdinois, found himself facing. A writer of somewhat sanctimonious novellas about the Neapolitan petit bourgeoisie, he began work on Little Dorrit with the same pedagogical purpose in mind, opting for an elevated, rather archaic style and tapping into a traditional repertoire that was rarely, and even then perhaps unintentionally, open to Southern colloquialisms. In line with this approach, all references to the places, institutions, and people that form a common frame of knowledge for English readers are omitted. Where Dickens conjures up some splendid nonsense to celebrate the community in its vivid diversity, or again to make fun of the grotesque circumlocution office, Verdinois paraphrases and moralizes, simplifying the original syntax and appropriating the text for his own agenda. When inevitably the Italian version hardly proved attractive to Italian readers, Verdinois observed ruefully, "One day I had the miserable idea, of translating into my poor Italian the Pickwick Papers." Hard to believe, I know, but that's the truth. Almost every day I would get letters saying that the translator was a bore and should stop at once and shorten the novel. What is this Pickwick after? How annoying your Dickens is. Is that humour? Verdinois's drift towards sentimentality is typical of the way Dickens was first read in Italy. No doubt the translator was genuinely enthusiastic about the richness of Dickens's prose, but also embarrassed by it and unable to reproduce it in Italian. The result was that early Italian readers were never exposed to Dickens's brilliant and inclusive humour. Thank you.